Next, we will take a look at the calculated column and the calculated measure. And calculate table, probably we will look at it a little later. First, let us understand what is calculated column. When the calculated column, we can create it. Like Pooja asked, when can I use measure? When can I use calculate? Well, we'll discuss that. And calculate table, when can I use it? That also we'll discuss it. What is calculated column, first of all? Calculated column is an extension of your table. That means, let's say in your table, you have 10 columns are there in your, let's say your table having all the raw data. Okay, you need to create some additional columns along with the existing columns in your table. In that kind of situation, the calculated column is very much helpful. The calculated column, right? So this one gets evaluated row by row. Okay, row by row, this one gets, so you remember that row by row, we use a fancy term called row text. So they in DAX, right, they use two fancy terms when it comes to the row context and filter context. Most of them, they get confused here. Okay, so if you create any column, calculate column, that is evaluated row by row, hence it is called a row context. That's all. Okay. So the calculate columns, once you create the additional columns, right? For example, you have 10 columns, you want to create 3 more columns in addition to the 10 columns. The newly created 3 columns will also become part of your table columns. And then it will, the all the 13 columns, including the calculated column, will get stored in memory, the X velocity memory. Okay. Okay, and even the calculated column values also can be calculated using DAX formulas. Okay, and the calculated column is often used as an intermediate step to obtain a final result. For example, you wanted to, you have a situation, something like you have something called total, or sorry, you have something called gross revenue. Gross revenue. Okay, you wanted to know the net revenue. Total net revenue. Net revenue. So in that case, first of all, you need, so here, what is the formula here? So your gross sales minus your total cost, right? Total cost or cost of goods sold, COGS, total cost. Okay. In this case, I'm going to first, create a column called total cost. So for example, here you have the quantity into the unit cost or the cost price. Let's say CP. CP stands for cost price. So this one will give you the total cost. And then you already have this one, right? The gross revenue is nothing but, let's assume that hypothetically, okay. In this case, gross revenue is equivalent to quantity into list price. List price. This is your gross revenue. So obviously the gross revenue is, you need to include various other factors. Okay, the discount, how much you get, discount value. Okay, and then you need to subtract the tax, everything. Okay, something like that. Okay, and then the net, or you need to add the tax also, and but here you need to subtract the to get the, you need to subtract the discount value, whatever you gave it, and then you need to subtract any special offer which you gave it to them, to the customers, right? All the things. So in that case, the total cost column is very much required. If you subtract the total cost value from your gross revenue, you will get the net revenue. So you need some intermediate step to calculate your net revenue. So in that kind of situation, to calculate the total cost, you need to have a calculated column. You might be asking this question, okay, I want to, if I subtract the total cost directly from my gross sales, it gives me the net sales. Why should I need a separate calculated column to hold the total cost? Your management wants to see the total cost, which is nothing but your kind of your cost of goods sold. That is also another measure. they wanted to see, okay, the key performance indicator, something like that. Okay. So in that kind of situation, you need to have that column also. So in that kind of situation, this is what it is, the intermediate step to obtain a final result. To obtain your net revenue, you need to have a column called total cost. So in that kind of situation, also you can use calculate column. And okay, once I create the calculate column, how frequently it will get refreshed in the memory. Whenever you click on the refresh in the report, that time the calculation will be performed while refreshing the memory. Okay. Next one is not calculated when filter changes on the dashboard. Let's say you have a slicer. When you keep changing the slicer, the formula will not get changed for each and every time, and the user selects the values or applies different filter in your report page. This one will not get recalculated. Only when you refresh your report, the calculation is done for the calculated column. It is pre-calculated and stored. Remember, in the intro, they'll ask you what is calculated column, what scenario you have to use the calculated column, and first of all, why you need to create a calculated column. So because in all these situations, the raw data itself not sufficient to create a report. We may need to create additional columns. In that kind of situation, we need a calculated column. The one flip side of calculated columns is when you add more number of columns, especially if you have huge volume of data in your data set, it will consume more memory. Hence, you need to be diligent before creating a new column, okay, whether you really need a new column or not. So what kind of situation do you really need a column? For example, I need to have a dedicated column to hold the total cost, because the total cost is helpful to compute the net revenue. Okay, in that kind of and other situation, other scenarios, like for example, in your slicer, if you want to use a column to apply the filters on your report page, right? That column should be there in your data set. If that column is not there, you need to create a new column. Calculator column, you have to create it. Okay, so these are the scenarios where you need to use the calculator column. The calculate column, remember that for the data is stored in X velocity in memory database. Okay, and next one is the measure. What is a measure? So measure is unlike the calculator column, right? It is used mainly for performing aggregation. Okay, if you most often we use the measure to perform aggregation. It is not pre-calculated like calculated column. Remember, this is very important. This is very important. The calculated columns are pre-calculated, whereas measure is not a pre-calculated one. That means the measure, whenever you call the measure, right, it will be calculated on the fly. Hence, it is CPU intensive, whereas the calculated columns are memory intensive. More the columns you add it, and importantly, the number of records are more. It is in memory intensive. You need to store huge volume of data in memory. Whereas in the case of measure, it doesn't require any memory. But the challenge here is, look here, I have created this measure. The moment when I drag and drop it, that time only it computes that. It performs the calculation, average or sum, whatever the function that you use, that one will be calculated on the fly when called upon. The moment when you drag and drop it, that time only it's all happening in terms of the milliseconds or in terms of seconds, right? Will get calculated. But it is a CPU intensive, right? It has to do calculation, a lot of things, especially if the volume of the data is very high and the business logic is a bit complex. Since it is calculating on the fly, you don't have to store it in your data set. Okay. And it can be reused on other measures. You can use a measure in another measure. and measures recalculate each time. But this is one of the flip side of it. Let's say in your report, when the report user, if they keep applying the filters using the slicer or filter, right? Each and every time when they apply the filter using slicer or so, the measure will get calculated based on the selections they made it on the fly. Hence, it is CP intensive. Hence, you need to be bit diligent in terms of choosing whether can I go ahead and create a measure or can I go ahead and use the calculated column. Okay, so now the question is, okay, I'm kind of okay with calculated column. If, for example, if I want to use a column in my slicer to apply the filter, obviously, the column should be present in your table. You cannot use a measure in your slicer. That is what I'm trying to say. You cannot use a measure in your slicer. You have to use a column. That column is not present in my table. You have to create a new column. That kind of situation, you need to create a calculated column. But measures are, really good if you wanted to perform any aggregation, sum of sales or quantity, or if you want to use sum X also, you can use it. The important point is the calculate column. It is the whatever the thing that use it, right? For example, you create a calculated column wherein you are using quantity into price. You can directly specify that also. Okay, so in that case, it performs row by row operation, row context. Whereas the same thing you can do it using iterative function in measure also. That is what I have shown you here. For example, here, the X function, where is that average X? Yeah, the average X function. This is the one I used in a measure, right? This is called your measure. Okay, but even in the case of measure, since I have used the iterative function, the function that ends with X, it performs the row by row operation like the calculated column. Where is that calculated column? Let me just show you here. Okay, I will create one calculator column. Look here, I'll just show you one example. Okay, column tools. Currently, I'm in the data view. And here also we have the new column. I just click on the new column. Here we don't have the price. Yeah, list price is available. Good. Okay, here what I do is I just say gross sales, something like that. Okay, and quantity into list price. List price is kind of your selling price. I'm going to press enter. Look here, in this case, I did not use sum X function, right? I did not use sum X function. The gross sales here, it is my calculated column. This is not a measure. I did not click on any measure, isn't it? See, in this case, the average X function, I just selected the modeling ribbon. I clicked on new measure. But whereas here, I just clicked on the new column in the data view. Hence, it is not called as a measure. It is called as a calculated column. In this case, I don't have to use the sum function, sum X function to perform row by row operation. Simply, if you create a calculated column by specifying the formula on the right side of your equal sign, it does the calculation row by row automatically. If I want to do the same operation, okay, I can also use a measure. I can also create a measure. But here, look here, gross sales measure, okay? But in this case, what happened? On the right side, both the quantity and price got underlined with the red. You cannot take a product on these two columns directly because it is not a calculated column. In this case, it is a measure. Hence, right? But again, you need to perform row by row operation. Hence, you need to use sum X function. Even in the case of measure, you can perform row by row operation using iterative function. In the case of calculated column, you don't have to use the iterative function, by default, in the case of calculated column, it performs a row by row operation. That is what the takeaway for you. Look here, after I wrapped this one with some X function, the error went off, right? There is no red colored line got underlined here, right? So now I just go ahead and click on this 1, 2, 3. Sorry, not this one. I just here I'm going to click on the cross because I need to search on the gross sales, right? Gross. This is the one I created it. I just drop it here. Look here, 20.161. And where is my calculated column? Can I check that one also here? 1, 2, 3. I just put here. So in that case, I've created a calculated column. So what it do this one? Look here, the gross is the calculated column. I just drop it here. Both of them show the same output. This is a calculated column. This is my calculated measure. You know, don't ask me, but you said in the case of calculated column only, it does the row by row operation. No, if you wanted to perform iterative, which is nothing but the row by row operation, that is also possible with your measure. The one, right, so, but the measure does not live in your data set. Okay, but this is already there in my data set. Which one? The quantity into price, right? And this column, gross is pre-existing one, but this is not the pre-existing one. It is simply, if you drag and drop it, it will work. But if you see here, the gross sales, right? You have something like table and some function, some notation. Whereas in the case of measure, you know, next to the measure, you'll find the calculator icon. So with the calculator icon, you can find out this is my measure, and with this one, the calculated table, this is your calculation, right? Calculate table. This is how you can find out. Okay. So both of them does the row by row operation. The difference is this data is not pre-existing. The moment when I dragged and dropped it, it got computed, whereas this one already existing in my data set, but simply it applies sum on this. That's all. Okay, next one is the gross sales. 1 second. I just select this one. Where is the gross sales? Okay, here I use this one, and this is my calculator column. Okay, leave it. So next one is there are two types of measure. The one is the implicit measure and other one is the explicit measure. You know what is implicit measure? That I explained you all, I think the very first or the very second session, all right, the beginning. So any numeric column, if you say it, along with that, the sigma notation is there, right? Sigma symbol is there. Where is my fact sales, for example? If you see here, and list price, next to that you can see sigma notation. And order number next to that. So this is a numeric column. When I drag and drop the quantity column into visual, it gives me the sum of quantity, sum of sales or sum of quantity, isn't it? Sum of sales or sum of quantity it gives me. It is not giving me the transaction data, right? For example, I just click on the table visual. I just drop the quantity. It gives me the sum of quantity. By default, it applies the sum function automatically on the numeric column when you drag and drop it into visual. So, okay, fine. Along with that, if I drop something like location, location is a text data. It gives me the breakup of the units sold or the quantity by location. In each location, see, earlier it was showing only this value. The moment when I dropped the quantity column into this table visual, it was showing 2755. Along with that, when I dropped a text column, out of this total units sold, how much units we sold in total in each location, it gives me that breakup automatically. This is the magic. This is where the DAX is gained a lot of this when, right? It gained a lot of popularity. Can you do it? Can you do the same thing in Excel? It is not possible. This is not possible. Okay, remember that when you drop any numeric column into a visual, it gives an the aggregated value by default 2755 in this case. But along with that, when you drop a text column, it gives you the breakup of or it gives me the units sold by location, right? Total units sold by location. It gives me the breakdown, right? Breakdown of the total units sold. If you want to see it, you can drop it. If you drop a customer key column, it gives you each customer how many units they purchase it in total out of this total units sold. It gives me the breakup automatically. Okay, so now you need to remember that the reason why I'm discussing is implicit measure. The quantity and all the numeric columns are by default called as the implicit measure, because by default, when you drag and drop any numeric column into visual, it performs the aggregation, sum of quantity, total quantity, give me that, it gives me that. This is auto summarization. This is done by Power BI automatically. It applies on the numeric column, hence it is called as a implicit measure. So explicit measure is the one which we created explicitly, like how I created that functions, right? The functions like, so why am I, okay, I think I switched over here. Okay, so yeah, so that is the one. Look here in this case. The average X function, right? The gross sales, net sales we computed, right? So the same thing here. That is what, for example, okay, I just create another measure. Sorry, I think because of which it was not working. Let me just go here. Okay, I have created it here. It seems correct. So this is the one I did it here. So when I drop a column quantity here, it gives me the total units sold by default. For example, I'm going to remove the location key. For that, I selected this visual and then I go here and then remove the location key. It gives me the total quantity. That is what. So if I drop a sales column, it gives me the total sales only. It will not give you the breakdown because the numeric value by default it performs the aggregation. It's an so now I'm going to create a measure, explicit measure. So don't give the auto summarization. Give me the explicit. For example, yeah, I'm going to drop the sales again. Not again, sorry, I'm going to drop the sales column. Okay, I think I don't have sales W, the fact sales is there. Okay, let it be there. Here, the sales amount column is there. This is my column. The calculator next to that column, what you see, that is your measure. Ideally, the measures are supposed to be kept in a separate table. That is the best practice. Don't mix the measures with your business column names. Okay, you need to create that. I will say it little later. I just drop the sales amount column also here. You can see that it gives me the total sales for the entire table data. How it is possible? It is doing the auto summarization, right? The default aggregation function is the sum function, not average. Okay, I just go here, modeling, click on new measure. I'm going to create an explicit measure. I just say total sales. total sales, I just say M1 is equivalent to sum of my sales amount column from my, sorry, not this one. This is my sales amount column. This is explicit measure. Explicitly, we are using a sum function to perform sum on my sales amount. Now the question is, why do I need to use an explicit measure when it can perform the auto summarization or the summarization on the sales amount column automatically? Why do I need to? But this is a best practice. What Microsoft suggests is don't use the default the implicit measure. Instead, you create an explicit measure and then you can use it. Look here, total sales M1. So this is what the total is we are getting. So this one is your implicit measure. This is the explicit measure because we have created the explicit measure here. This is your implicit measure. You don't, did we create any measure for this? Nothing, right? For this, we did not create any measure. Only for this, we create a measure. In this measure, right, in this case, it gives me the total sales. Even this one also gives me the total sales. Both of them gives me the same output. Then which one should I use it? The Microsoft recommends use the measures wherever it is required. Okay, so that you can use them, you can reuse the measure. For example, I want to use some divide function. Okay. Let me do one thing. Here I'll just show you with not divide. What is that? All measure. Do I have it here? All percentage of sales. Yeah. Look here. In this case, I'm using a DAX function called divide, and here I have used the measure. This one I already created it. You remember the total sales space M1, which I got. Likewise, I created the total sales. Even if you open this measure, you can see that sum of sales amount will be there. If I use my sales amount column here, what will happen? Again, you need to use sum of sales amount, right? You did the total, say you computed the total sales. That one you used it in your measure called total sales. Again, you don't have to use sum of sales amount, right? You can use a measure inside another measure. And with that, you understood, so why the explicit measure is required. See, if I don't have this one, what I have to do? I have to use sum of sales amount. Sum of sales amount. Again, if you are, let's assume that in your 10, we are going to create 10 measure. For each and every measure, so you have to use the total sales. In that case, do you need to, in that case, do you think it is wise using sum of sales amount again and again? That for that, you can simply use the measure which you are using. For example, in our case, total sales, this is one we created a while back, right? You can simply reuse the measure. And this is your numerator, the denominator, I use something else. That is what you divide. So hence, with this example, I understood, I think you all understood, DAX, you can, once you create a measure, you can reuse it. You can reuse it. And not all the time the implicit measure is helpful. Better you can create a explicit measure. That is what the best practice recommended by Microsoft. The reason is, look here, you can simply reuse it again and again. You don't have to use sum of sales amount, sum of sales amount. But when you drag and drop a numeric column into a visual, it applies the sum. Okay, but when you use the column name here, it is not doing the sum automatically. Okay, good. So ideally, they can give that way also here, right? So if when you use sales column, when I type sales amount, sum of sales amount should go, and we can remove it, right? But that is not the right way of doing it. This is what they recommended. So now you understood the difference between implicit and explicit measure. Power BI should behave like Excel. Pivot tables in short, sum numbers by count. Power BI numeric columns are summarized by property. Okay. All measures should have explicitly defined. Look here, default behavior may not always be right. Now, to summarize, the difference between the calculated columns and measures, calculated columns are stored in memory, whereas it is not stored in memory. It's a pre-calculated one, right? It is getting refreshed only when you refresh your report. Sorry, it performs it gets recalculated only when you refresh your report, and it consumes memory because it's stored in memory, and it performs row by row calculation usually, and it is not stored in memory. It is calculated on the fly, but since it is calculating it on the fly, it consumes CPU, whereas the calculate column consumes memory. It is usually a result of an aggregation. General, if you want to perform any kind of aggregation, you can go for measure. If you have to have a column in your data set, in that kind of situation, you can go for calculated column. Values can be seen when adding in. This is another report. So as soon as, sorry, this is another feature, okay? As soon as you create a calculated column, you can see the result immediately. Whereas once you create the measure, you cannot see the result immediately unless you drag and drop it into visual. These are the core difference between the calculated column and measures. So now the question is when to use the calculated column and when can I use measure? Use the value as a filter condition to DAX query. Yeah, this is another important point. If you want to filter the data, right? So in that kind of situation, you need to have the column in your table. Otherwise, how can you, filter the data or subset the data? Okay, define an expression that is bound to the current row. Okay, and if you want to perform any row by row operation, that kind of situation, you can go for calculated column. Use the value in rows or columns of pivot table. Yes, in the case of matrix, I want to use a column. Okay, pivoting. So in that kind of situation, you can go for calculated column. And if you have to use a column in a slicer, if that column is not available in my data set, in that kind of situation, you can go for calculated column. When to use ratio or measure, right? If you want to perform if you want to compute the percentage or ratio, and if you want to use, right, if you want to compute the percentage or aggregation, that kind of situation, you can go for measure. Use a value that reflects, use a selection of filters, slice, highlighted visuals. Okay, whatever the value that you selected in your visual, you remember the cross highlight I explained you. Or cross filtering, right? So in that kind of situation, the measures will get computed on the fly based on the. But one flip side of the measure is if the users, the report users, and they keep changing the values in the slicers, especially if the volume is very huge, it involves a lot of computation. It requires a lot of CPU. Okay, so now you understood what is calculated column, what is a calculated measure. We'll discuss about the calculated table later point in time. It is too early to discuss about that. When I discuss about the calculate table or filter function, that time I will show you again. We are going to discuss in detail about the filter function. So it is already 10:30. What we'll do is we'll circle back on this Tuesday. And Tuesday we'll continue the important concepts like evaluation context. I thought of completing the evaluation context today. But if I start now, there will, it requires more time. Better will for the sake of continuation. That's a very important concept. We will continue from Tuesday. So upcoming Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, if I can afford to continuously, if I continue the 3-day session, right, without any break, I think we'll be able to complete the DAX, everything. Okay. Because I have the report file, everything is readily available. I will be able to complete on time. Okay. Next week, we will be completing the DAX part. Okay. And followed by next week, including I will try to complete the exercise also. And followed by next week, I will cover exercise very simple. Okay. You kind of a drag and drop. But again, it has its own limitations, all the things. You should be knowing the different properties of that. And the next week, followed by the next week, we'll wrap up the training program. I will cover the SQL part, basics to advanced level, right? I have the data set, everything is available. M language, yeah, M language, already it is generated, that is developed, that is generated automatically by the Power Query editor, right? So they expect more on the DAX only, the interview, okay, DAX and data visualization, each and every model. As part of data ETL part, they'll explain, they expect you to tell a few names of um, uh, the M language. So you know very well, M language is good, but the thing is, in real life scenario, we are working with the databases, huge volume of data. Most of the time, we use direct query only. In that case, what is the point in using your M script, right? M script doesn't work if you have to do even the intermediate or advanced level or complex level data transformation on your direct query. It is not at all working, right? Hence, if you know the few, I'll tell you what functions you can remember it. That is enough. Yeah, we'll touch base it. Okay, we'll touch base that. Okay, don't worry. We'll touch upon it. Okay, so now the focus is on the DAX function. Once we are done with that, yeah, probably next week we'll spend few minutes to complete the M language thing. But I would say honestly, right, even see practically, forget about interview also, right? Practically, it is not much helpful. Which one? The DAX, sorry, M script, okay? Because we are working with huge volume of data. Even if you want to merge the table, you want to split the columns, it is not working. Okay. Hence, if you know DAX and SQL part, that is what they expect on the interview also. But anyhow, we'll discuss, we'll touch upon it. Don't worry. Fine. That's pretty much it in today's session. We will continue the upcoming Tuesday. Okay. Any questions? Anything else? Okay. The videos, yes, yesterday video and today video also I'll upload it. Don't worry. Okay. Yes. Good night. Thank you all. See you all next week. Okay. Have a nice weekend. Bye bye. Take care.